There's much more to a desert than sand, heat, and the occasional giant pyramid. Some of what you'd stumble upon when wandering the dunes are just plain bizarre. Here are 10 of the strangest things ever found in the desert. Not everyone in ancient Egypt got a giant pyramid when they died. That's a pharaoh thing. The regular folks were buried in the ground much like everybody else. But we don't know as much about the lives and deaths of ordinary Egyptian people because we're usually so focused on the important people who get pyramids. So that's why discoveries like the following are so important. In August 2018, Egyptologists uncovered a buried necropolis in the Sahara Desert village of Lisht. It contained 802 tombs, each over 4,000 years old. These tombs had been buried under many feet of sand for thousands of years, undetected by experts until just recently. Experts started wondering if something was amiss back in 2014, as satellite images were showing increasing amounts of dark pockmarks, indicating holes dug up in the desert. As the dark spots multiplied more and more, researchers decided to see what was under the sand that was just so interesting. What they found were 802 interlocking tombs dating back to ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom. Many of these tombs could house multiple bodies. Some had room for up to 8. Since families tended to be buried together, even extended family members like fourth cousins 3 times removed needed all the room they could get. Unfortunately, by the time archaeologists uncovered the graves, they were mostly empty. The holes satellite images discovered were caused mainly by looters, who knew about the necropolis but weren't exactly keen on alerting the authorities. Still, they found plenty of shards of art and pottery, and even some human remains. They hope this will provide insight into how everyday folk lived during the still mysterious Middle Kingdom. Hopefully none of the bodies buried there cursed whoever dug up their graves, as that mischievous King Tut did. Central Australia is mostly desert, with a few towns scattered here and there, meaning there's plenty of room to find something unexpected among the mountains and kangaroos. We'd say a gigantic man etched on one of those mountains qualifies as unexpected. Dubbed MARREE Man, after the tiny 150-person town nearby, this geoglyph depicts what appears to be an Aborigine man wielding either a boomerang or a stick. It's 1.7 miles tall, has a 17-mile perimeter, and stretched out over 620 acres. In 1998, a helicopter pilot discovered MARREE Man while flying above the outback. But over 20 years later, we still know virtually nothing about MARREE Man. We don't even know who he's supposed to be, what he signifies, or even who created him. Experts found various stakes planted in the ground, which likely helped map out MARREE Man, but that still raises tons of questions. Namely, how did they know to do this? Even though it was created shortly before discovery, that means whoever did it did so in an era when GPS was primitive at best. We were still several years away from MapQuest messing up every other direction. And yet MARREE Man came out perfectly, with nary a mistake anywhere. To this day, nobody knows how such a feat is possible. Whoever is behind MARREE Man, provided they're still alive, isn't interested in coming forward. They probably enjoy the mystery they've built up, which came complete with phony press releases sent out shortly after discovery. Based on the language and terminology, it sounded like Americans were behind MARREE Man. However, it's now believed that those press releases were intentionally written in an American style to trick people. MARREE Man's real creator remains a mystery. If you happen to know who is behind the geoglyph, feel free to contact an Australian entrepreneur named Dick Smith. He's offering $3,700 for any information leading to the identity of MARREE Man's parents. It's not life-changing money, but it would afford you a vacation in a charming Australian city, where kangaroos are less likely to kick you in the head. Back in April of 2003, the US invaded Iraq to look for weapons of mass destruction. They never found any, but they did find something much weirder: a whole bunch of fighter jets buried in the sand. Uncovering planes in the sand would be strange enough on its own, but these weren't exactly old, outdated models. Instead, they were MiG-25 Foxbats and Su-25 Frogfoot fighter bombers. These were top-of-the-line fighters that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein relied on to help defend his nation. The problem was they were only top-of-the-line against nearby nations. Against the incoming Americans, however, he knew his Air Force didn't stand a chance. He also knew that if the Americans found the grounded planes, they would strip and destroy them, even if fighter planes aren't WMDs. So he decided to hide the planes under the sand. His thinking appeared to be that once the Americans left, he would dig his aircraft back up and go back to terrorizing nearby nations with them. It wasn't a bad idea per se. When the US stumbled upon the planes, they were still in good condition. Many of them didn't have wings, but otherwise worked fine, even after filling their engines and cockpits with several months' worth of sand. Unfortunately for Saddam, the entire plan hinged on his staying in power after the Americans left. That didn't happen. He was captured by US forces in December of 2003 and executed in 2006. As for the planes, they didn't survive very long. The US Air Force didn't exactly have a use for them after all. On your list of animals whose bones you'd expect to find in the desert, whales are likely at the bottom. So in 2010, when researchers stumbled upon a desert gravesite littered with the bones of around 40 whales, they were understandably flummoxed. Experts discovered the nearly complete whale fossils in Chile's Atacama Desert. Also, they unearthed the bones of seals, extinct dolphins with walrus-like faces, and an extinct aquatic sloth called Thalassocnus. In other words, this desert has somehow come to possess the bones of sea creatures. For a while, nobody knew what had happened, or how the fossils wound up in a desert. After all, the nearest coastline is over half a mile away. But in 2014, paleobiologists at the Smithsonian Institution arrived at a sensible conclusion. All the animals died at sea millions of years ago thanks to toxins caused by algae blooms, and their corpses washed up where we found them. But back then, the Atacama area was either underwater or had a shoreline. Since then, tectonic plates have overlapped enough that Atacama is both high above sea level and completely dry. The fossils, however, remain buried there, until paleontologists sent many of them packing to various museums. Likely, however, hundreds more fossils are still buried deep in the desert. Given the number of layers paleobiologists have uncovered, the toxic algae struck at least 4 times over history. That's a lot of dead whales. Some things are only mysterious because they look that way. Such is the case with the Egyptian cones, an incredibly bizarre bit of art way out near Egypt's Red Sea, which we already know most everything about. It's still plenty weird though. The cones are part of a mid-90s art project called Desert Breath by Greek artist Denis Stratau and his team. They dug out a circular pool of water and created a spiralized series of cones that looks like mini pyramids inside a pit. It's curious enough when seen from the ground, but positively breathtaking when viewed from the sky. Or at least it was. Stratau's goal was to create artwork that would fade and erode over time, and that's what has happened. Years later, the pool of water is dried up, and the cones are barely visible from up high. They mostly look like a bunch of holes. As for how Stratau put Desert Breath together, that's about the only genuinely mysterious part of the whole thing. Nobody's sure how he did it, and he's not telling. An artist, like a magician, never reveals his secrets. If you're ever in the West Texas desert and get a hankering for designer purses, head on over to the Prada store right off of Route 90. There you'll find absolutely nothing, because it's not a real Prada store. Instead, it's an art exhibit that purposefully looks entirely out of place among the sand and tumbleweeds. In 2005, the art duo Elmgreen and Dragset set out to install a phony Prada store somewhere in the desert. They wanted to make a statement on how capitalism can taint even the most remote of natural spaces. They eventually settled on an area about a half hour from the minimalist art mecca that is Marfa, Texas. They dubbed their creation Prada Marfa and left it out in the desert to age and make its statement. With no working door, you can't enter the single-room exhibit, though you can view legitimate Prada handbags and shoes through the window. The sheer weirdness of a luxury retail store just randomly appearing in the middle of the desert makes Prada Marfa a significant tourist destination. This has only increased in recent years, thanks to people's ability to crow about cool stuff on the internet. At one point, pop megastar Beyoncé uploaded a photo of her visiting Prada Marfa to her Instagram, which instantly increased the art's exposure millions of times over. An episode of the show Gossip Girl once displayed a Prada Marfa sign, further establishing it as a hip place for hip people to act hip in the hippest way. For decades, scientists have been confused by the existence of fairy circles in Africa's Namibian desert. These are circular patches of soil ranging from 6 to 50 feet in diameter, surrounded by rings of grass. They didn't seem natural, and yet nobody could figure out where they came from. Were they man-made? Fairy-made? Local Namibian legends offer several explanations, none of which are particularly scientific. Some say aliens created them as landing spots for their spaceships. Others think fairy circles are the gods' footprints. Others feel underground dragons scorch the soil with their fire breath. Adding to the mystery was how nobody could find fairy circles anywhere else. They were simply a Namibian desert phenomenon, so maybe something was indeed happening there. Maybe Namib does keep underground dragons. Or so we thought until 2016, when ecologists discovered similar fairy circles in the Australian outback. So it was not a local deal, and there had to be a natural scientific explanation for the circles. In the years since, a couple of theories have sprung forth, but nothing concrete enough to become scientific law. One camp believes that ants and termites eat at grass roots in convenient locations around their nests, meaning the plants die back in a circular pattern. Another argument feels that the plants are actually organizing to more easily access water for each other. Simultaneously, they're using their roots to soak up water and keep it from grasses competing from a distance. Compared to all the other strange things in nature, grass hoarding water from other grass sounds decidedly ordinary. Neither side can prove their theory just yet. meaning we may have to discover more fairy circles before learning the truth. Until then, we'll assume it's dragons. Imagine wandering the desert and coming across a field of half-buried cars. You'd probably wonder what in the world is going on, especially since these cars are covered in graffiti. As it turns out, such a site does exist, and it's 100% there on purpose. In the deserts of Amarillo, Texas, you'll find the Cadillac Ranch. It's been there since 1974, when a group of hippies called the Ant Farm partnered with Stanley Marsh. No, not the kid from South Park, but an eccentric billionaire businessman who enjoyed messing with people as much as he enjoyed making money. Armed with his money, the Ant Farm procured 10 Cadillacs, drove them to the desert, buried them nose down in the sand, and left them there. Simple as that. Marsh wanted art that would, as Roadside America put it, baffle the locals, and he did just that. He also gave the locals carte blanche to destroy the art. Visitors quickly started adding graffiti to the Cadillacs when they weren't busy ripping pieces off to show the folks at home. Marsh and the Ant Farm decided they were okay with this and allowed their art to beget other art. Decades later, the Cadillac Ranch is still active, and you can still visit and mess with the cars. Deface them, take silly pictures with them, or just be baffling. It's what Stanley Marsh would have wanted. Deserts tend not to sport giant lakes, unless you're a dehydrated cartoon character staring at an illusion. How then to explain Lac de Gafsa, a large lake that's not only real and not only smack dab in the middle of the Tunisian desert, but that didn't exist before 2014? Ever since locals discovered Lac de Gafsa that year, it's become a huge tourist attraction. And why wouldn't it? Who wouldn't be fascinated by a 60-foot deep lake that appeared in the desert, seemingly out of nowhere? People flock to the lake to take pictures and, of course, swim. This has caused concern from locals, who, knowing how phosphate-rich the nearby soil is, worry that the water may be toxic. Those fears compounded when the water changed from bright blue to foggy green. Luckily, no test thus far has suggested any toxicity, but that still doesn't explain where in the world the lake came from. Some local Tunisian people think it's a miraculous sign from above. Science, ever the party pooper, has an alternate explanation. Their theory is that in 2014, the area suffered a small earthquake that damaged the rock around a small section of surface-level water. This rupturing caused millions of gallons of underground water to come shooting up to the surface, quickly forming a lake. As for the color change, that's likely due to the water finally no longer actively flowing. Once lake water stagnates, it tends to fog up and turn green, which is likely what happened to Lac de Gafsa. Whether it be science or a miracle, it sure does look refreshing. Everybody into the pool! Ghost towns in the western US aren't anything new. But how about one in Africa's Namibian desert that's in danger of being eaten up by the sand surrounding it? Called Kolmanskop, this was once a thriving town thanks to the diamond rush. In 1908, a mine worker discovered diamonds in the area, and so hordes of prospectors descended upon it. They quickly built a town, known both for its diamonds and for its weirdness. The German colonizers who ran the mines imported opera groups from Europe to perform for the prospectors, and one Kolmanskop family even had a pet ostrich that pulled a sleigh around Christmas time. The fun ended in the 1930s, once the diamonds did. The second shiny things ran dry around Kolmanskop and more turned up elsewhere, prospectors abandoned the town. Soon, the desert sands invaded the empty homes and offices, drowning them in the sand to this day. Kolmanskop lives on as a tourist attraction, though it may not be that way for much longer. In 2010, studies showed that the town's buildings were rapidly deteriorating. Though they're mostly still around a decade later, it's likely only a matter of time before the desert destroys them entirely. So visit while you still can. It's easier than recreating the experience by renting an ostrich to pull you around while you listen to European opera.